Welcome to Serial Killers Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Carter. In the heart of Atlanta, Georgia, a city known for its distinctive blend of Southern charm and urban sophistication, a chilling series of events unfolded in the late 1970s and early 1980s that would forever shatter the tranquility of this metropolis. The city, once a symbol of Southern hospitality, was now under the shadow of a relentless predator, an enigma that left a trail of young victims in its wake. This was the landscape that Wayne Bertram Williams navigated, a place and time where the line between predator and prey became unsettlingly blurred. Williams, born and raised in Atlanta, was an ambitious young man with dreams that reached far beyond the confines of his hometown. He aspired to be a music producer, a radio station owner, a man of influence in an industry that promised fame and fortune. But beneath the veneer of ambition, authorities would later suggest, lurked a much darker reality. As Williams chased his dreams, Atlanta was grappling with a horrifying reality. Children and young adults were vanishing, only to be found later, their lives cruelly snuffed out. The city was in the grip of fear, a community held hostage by an unseen terror. And as the body count rose, the question on everyone's lips was simple yet haunting. Who was responsible? Who was stealing the futures of Atlanta's youth? As the city's law enforcement scrambled to answer these questions, a breakthrough came on a balmy night in May 1981. An officer, stationed at a bridge over the Chattahoochee River, heard a splash. A car sped away from the scene. The driver of that car was Wayne Williams. Within days, the body of Nathaniel Cater, a 27-year-old man, was discovered downstream. Suddenly, the spotlight and the suspicions of a city turned towards Williams. But did this ambitious young man, with dreams of music industry success, really morph into the monster that terrorized Atlanta? Was Williams the predator that the city's desperate search for answers needed him to be? Or was he just a scapegoat, caught in the crosshairs of a city under siege and a law enforcement system desperate for resolution? These are the questions that have haunted this case for decades. As we delve into the story of Wayne Williams, we navigate through a labyrinth of evidence, testimonies, and unanswered questions. We explore a narrative that is as complex as it is chilling, a tale that forces us to confront our understanding of justice, truth, and the human capacity for evil. This is the story of a city held captive by fear, a man accused of the unthinkable, and a series of crimes that would forever change Atlanta. This is the story of Wayne Williams. Set against the backdrop of the late 1970s and early 1980s, Atlanta was a city at the crossroads of change. The civil rights movement had imbued the city with a sense of hope and aspiration, and Atlanta was striving to live up to its self-proclaimed title of the city too busy to hate. But underneath this progressive facade, socioeconomic disparity was widespread, and many of Atlanta's neighborhoods, particularly those predominantly African American, were under the oppressive weight of poverty and neglect. The urban sprawl of Atlanta, with its juxtaposition of skyscrapers and dilapidated housing, was a testament to this stark economic divide. The city was a patchwork quilt of affluence and poverty, stitched together by highways and public transit lines. Amidst this patchwork, the neighborhoods of West and South Atlanta, home to the majority of the victims, were particularly marred by socioeconomic challenges. As the decade turned, the city was in the throes of a profound crisis. The disappearances started in the summer of 1979, an eerie undercurrent to the sweltering Atlanta heat. The victims were all African American children and young adults, their ages ranging from 7 to 28, most of them boys. They hailed from the city's most vulnerable communities, their dreams and potential cruelly extinguished. The city's initial response to these disappearances was slow, mired in bureaucratic apathy and negligence. The local media, too, was slow to report on the unfolding crisis. But as the number of victims escalated, so did the palpable sense of fear and outrage. It seeped into homes, into conversations, into the very fabric of the city. Mothers kept their children indoors. Neighborhood watches were organized. The city was on high alert, yet the killer remained elusive. This was Atlanta during the reign of the purported Atlanta child murderer, a city under siege, its vibrant spirit shadowed by an omnipresent dread. The social climate was increasingly charged, underscored by a rising tide of communal activism and a growing mistrust of the city's law enforcement. The very communities that were most affected by these horrific crimes were also the ones historically marginalized and overlooked by the city's predominantly white power structures. This was the Atlanta that Wayne Williams knew. This was the city that shaped him. A city caught between progress and disparity, aspiration and fear. As the net slowly tightened around Williams, the city would grapple with a chilling possibility. Could one of their own be responsible for the terror that had gripped Atlanta? The ensuing investigation and trial would not only seek to answer this question, but would also lay bare the deep-seated racial and socio-economic fissures of Atlanta. The victims in this chilling saga were not random. The predator had a type. They were all African-American children and young adults, most of them boys. The youngest, LaTonya Wilson, was just 7 when she disappeared from her own bedroom, leaving behind a pair of house shoes and a television blaring cartoons. The oldest, Nathaniel Cater, was a 27-year-old laborer whose body was found floating in the Chattahoochee River, a scene that would become all too familiar in this grim narrative. Alfred Evans, only 13, was the first. He disappeared on a hot July day in 1979 after telling his mother he was going to a movie. His body was found a week later, not far from his home. He had been strangled. A palpable sense of dread began to creep over the city, a dread that would only intensify with the disappearance of 14-year-old Edward Smith, a promising student and athlete who vanished just a few days after Evans. Smith's body was discovered in a wooded area, struck down by a .22 caliber bullet. The disappearances and murders continued with distressing regularity. Milton Harvey, 14, went missing while running an errand on his yellow 10-speed bike. His bike was found, but Harvey was not. His body would be discovered 2 months later, abandoned in a remote area. The year 1979 ended with the horrific murder of 7-year-old LaTonya Wilson, snatched from the safety of her own home. The new year brought no respite. The killings continued. Luby Jeter, 14, disappeared while out shopping for his mother. His body was found a week later, discarded by the roadside like so many before him. By this time, the community was in a state of near panic. The missing posters featuring young, smiling faces became a hauntingly common sight, a stark reminder of the children who were no longer there to play, to learn, to grow. The list of victims grew. Eric Middlebrooks, 14, a paperboy. Curtis Walker, 13, who was last seen playing at a park. Timothy Hill, 13, who vanished after leaving a friend's house. William Barrett, 17, whose body was found in a wooded area near his home. All young lives, full of promise, ended too soon. As the body count rose, so did the public's fear and anger. These were their children, their neighbors, their friends. The killer was not just stealing lives, he was stealing the very heart of the community. Each new victim, each unanswered question, only deepened the city's wounds. And through it all, the question loomed: who was behind this reign of terror? As the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, the name Wayne Williams began to emerge from the shadows. As the chilling crimes escalated, the Atlanta police found themselves under an ever-growing pressure to solve the cases. The city's children were disappearing on a near-regular basis. The public's terror was palpable. The police, however, seemed to be perpetually one step behind. They were chasing a ghost, a killer who left few traces and followed a pattern that was as unpredictable as it was horrifying. Law enforcement's initial investigations were hampered by a lack of resources and a slow response from higher authorities. Some officers on the ground believed they were dealing with a serial killer, but without concrete proof, their warnings went unheeded. As the death toll rose, a task force was finally assembled to tackle the case. It was named the Atlanta Child Murders Task Force, a grim testament to the severity of the situation. The task force was composed of local law enforcement, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and the FBI. They began a painstaking process of gathering and analyzing evidence, speaking with witnesses, and trying to piece together a pattern from the seemingly random acts of violence. Yet, despite their efforts, the killer remained elusive. The list of victims continued to grow, and the public's trust in the police began to wane. Then, in April 1981, the investigation took a turn. The task force received a call that a body had been found in the Chattahoochee River. The victim was a young man named Nathaniel Cater. His death was similar to the others. He had been strangled, and his body dumped in a remote location. Yet, the police felt they had a lead. The night before Cater's body was found, an officer had heard a splash in the river near the area Cater was discovered. A car was seen quickly leaving the scene, and a partial license plate was noted. This lead prompted the task force to take a new approach. They decided to stake out the bridges over the Chattahoochee River, hoping to catch the killer in the act. The operation was risky, requiring a high level of coordination and patience. But the investigators were desperate. They were no closer to solving the case than they had been when the first child went missing, and they felt they had no other option. The stakeout was in place for a few weeks when, in the early hours of May 22, 1981, an officer heard a loud splash. Racing to the scene, he spotted a car driving away from the bridge. The car was stopped, and the driver was identified as 23-year-old Wayne Williams. Williams was a local freelance photographer and music promoter. He was well known in the community, often seen at local events with his camera. Yet, there was something about him that raised the investigators' suspicions. His calm demeanor, his vague answers, and the fact that he was out so late at night all struck the officers as odd. Williams was questioned and released, but he remained on their radar. Little did they know the net was beginning to close around the man who would soon become infamous as the alleged Atlanta child murderer. In the initial stages of his encounter with law enforcement, Wayne Williams was not immediately pegged as a prime suspect. His professional standing in the community as a freelance photographer and music promoter lent him a certain credibility. However, his peculiar behavior and the unusual circumstances surrounding his presence on the bridge that night were enough to keep him on the investigators' radar. As the task force began to look more closely at Williams, they discovered a man who was more complex than his external persona suggested. He was described as intelligent, ambitious, and socially adept, someone who could easily gain the trust of young boys aspiring to break into the music industry. Yet, beneath this facade, there were indications of a darker nature. Williams had a history of altercations with young boys, often over trivial matters. He had been known to exert a domineering control over those he worked with, displaying a temper that could quickly flare up. In light of the nature of the murders, this pattern of behavior was notable. It suggested a potential for violence that could escalate under the right circumstances. As the task force delved deeper into Williams's background, they also discovered a disturbing correlation. The frequency of the murders seemed to coincide with periods of stress and upheaval in Williams's life, such as professional failures or personal disappointments. This pattern is often seen in serial killers, whose violent impulses can be triggered by stress or feelings of inadequacy. Behind the lens of a camera or in the guise of a music promoter, Williams had the perfect cover to approach young boys. His charm and the allure of potential stardom could easily lure unsuspecting victims into his trap. This, combined with his volatile temper and potential for violence, painted a chilling portrait of a possible predator. Despite these emerging patterns, police were still lacking concrete evidence tying Williams to the murders. They had a portrait of a man who fit the psychological profile of the killer. But they needed more. They needed something tangible, something that could irrefutably link Williams to the killings. As they intensified their scrutiny of Williams, they hoped that they were closing in on the elusive killer who had held Atlanta in a grip of fear for too long. Meanwhile, Williams continued his daily life, unaware that he was under such intense scrutiny. He continued to photograph events, promote musicians, and blend into the community. He was a familiar face in the crowd, a man who appeared to be just like everyone else. But if the investigators were right, Wayne Williams was anything but ordinary. The breakthrough the police needed came in the form of a seemingly ordinary traffic stop on May 22, 1981. An officer on stakeout duty heard a splash in the Chattahoochee River, a location already linked to several of the murders. Moments later, a station wagon driven by Wayne Williams was stopped as it emerged from the bridge. The officer noted fibers on Williams's attire and in his vehicle, but lacking more substantial evidence, Williams was allowed to leave. Yet this seemingly uneventful encounter was a turning point. The fibers became a crucial lead, providing the police with the tangible evidence they had been seeking. The Atlanta Police Department turned to the emerging field of forensic science, specifically fiber analysis, to investigate further. The fibers found on Williams and in his car were compared to those found on some of the victims. They were an unusual type of fiber, a blend of green carpet fiber and yellowish nylon, which matched the carpet in Williams's home and his vehicle. This was a significant development. Given the rarity of the fibers and their presence on multiple victims, the likelihood of this being a coincidence was astronomically low. In addition to the fiber evidence, 2 hairs were found on the body of one of the victims. These hairs were subjected to microscopic analysis, a novel technique at the time. The results were startling. The hairs bore a striking resemblance to those of Williams, both in terms of color and structure. Witness testimonies further strengthened the case against Williams. Several witnesses testified to seeing him with various victims before their disappearances. One witness even reported seeing Williams holding hands with a young boy, who was later identified as one of the victims. By mid-June, the police had enough evidence to arrest Williams. His seemingly normal life was disrupted as he was charged with 2 of the murders, those of Nathaniel Cater and Jimmy Ray Payne. While these were the only charges brought against him, the police believed that Williams was responsible for at least 23 of the 29 murders. The trial that followed was a media sensation, with the fiber evidence at the heart of the prosecution's case. Testimony from forensic experts helped to illustrate the significance of the fibers and hairs, emphasizing their rarity and the unlikely odds of them being found by chance. The fiber evidence, combined with the witness testimonies, painted a damning picture of Williams. These pivotal pieces of evidence, coupled with Williams's erratic behavior and fits of anger during the trial, were crucial in securing a conviction. On February 27, 1982, Wayne Williams was found guilty of murder and sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms. Through the diligent work of investigators and the application of cutting-edge forensic techniques, the Atlanta Police Department had finally brought an end to the reign of a serial killer. Yet the case of Wayne Williams remains controversial, with some questioning the validity of the fiber evidence and others suggesting the possibility of other unidentified killers. Despite these debates, the conviction of Williams marked a turning point in the history of forensic science, demonstrating its potential in solving complex crimes. The arrest and ensuing trial of Wayne Williams were significant events in the annals of crime history. The wave of terror that had swept across Atlanta had found a face, and it was the face of a seemingly ordinary man, a music promoter and freelance photographer who now stood accused of heinous crimes. The courtroom atmosphere was charged, a reflection of the palpable tension that had gripped the city. Every seat was filled, the gallery packed with journalists, family members of the victims, and curious spectators. The trial was broadcast live on local television, a first for Georgia, amplifying the public scrutiny and the pressure on the prosecution to secure a conviction. Williams's defense team, led by attorney Mary Welcome, focused on discrediting the fiber evidence. They argued that the fibers could have come from any number of sources, not necessarily Williams's home or car. They also pointed out the lack of any physical evidence directly linking Williams to the murder scenes. Yet the prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Jack Mallard, held their ground. They presented the fiber evidence as the linchpin of their case, buttressing it with the testimonies of the witnesses who had seen Williams with the victims. The prosecution also highlighted Williams's erratic behavior during the police questioning and his fits of anger during the trial as indicative of a violent and unstable character. Despite the defense's best efforts, the jury was swayed by the prosecution's narrative. After 12 hours of deliberation, they returned with their verdict. Williams was found guilty of the murders of Nathaniel Cater and Jimmy Ray Payne. The reaction to the verdict was mixed. While some viewed it as a triumph of justice, others felt that Williams had been unfairly targeted, a scapegoat for a series of crimes that remained unsolved. The conviction did little to bring closure to the families of the other victims, who were left with unanswered questions and unresolved grief. The trial of Wayne Williams was more than just a legal proceeding. It was a cultural and societal turning point. It was a stark reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of ordinary lives, and of the painstaking work required to bring such darkness to light. And while the case remains shrouded in controversy and doubt, its impact on the field of forensic science and criminal investigation is undeniable. Williams's trial served as a testament to the power of evidence, however small and seemingly insignificant, in the pursuit of justice. To understand Wayne Williams, to delve into the mind of the man found guilty of these heinous crimes, one must grapple with unsettling questions. What could drive an individual to such extremes? What dark impulses might lurk beneath an unassuming exterior? To answer these questions, one must venture into the complex labyrinth of human psychology, where motive and trauma intertwine. Williams was an aspiring music producer and freelance photographer, a man with dreams that were described as far from the grim reality he found himself in. Yet beneath this facade, there were signs of a darker psyche. Williams was known to have a temper, a fact that came to the fore during his trial. His fits of anger suggested a volatile personality, a trait often associated with individuals who commit violent crimes. A psychological evaluation of Williams would likely focus on his childhood and adolescence, crucial periods in the formation of personality and behavior. Growing up in Atlanta, Williams was an only child raised by both parents. He was described as intelligent and ambitious, but also a loner. As an African-American youth in the 1960s and 1970s, he would have faced the harsh realities of racial discrimination, an experience that can manifest in a multitude of psychological responses. Some psychological theories suggest that killers often harbor feelings of powerlessness, stemming from childhood experiences. They commit violent acts as a way to exert control and dominance, to temporarily silence their inner turmoil. Could this have been true for Williams? Could his ambitious dreams have been a cover for an insatiable need for power and control? These are questions that only Williams himself can fully answer. His interactions with the victims also provide some insight. Most of the Atlanta child murders victims were young, vulnerable boys from impoverished backgrounds. They were easy targets, susceptible to manipulation and control. Williams, with his claims of scouting talent for a music company, could have easily lured them with promises of fame and success. These are possible explanations, fragments of a much larger and complex psychological puzzle. The human mind is a vast and intricate entity, full of contradictions and complexities. It is impossible to fully understand what drives a person to commit such monstrous acts. Examining Williams's psychology is not meant to justify or excuse his crimes. It is, however, crucial to understanding the nature of these crimes, to learn from them, and hopefully to prevent their recurrence. The mind of Wayne Williams remains an enigma, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can reside within the human psyche. The quest to unravel this enigma continues, adding another layer to the already complex narrative of the Atlanta child murders. In the wake of the trials and the media storm surrounding Williams, the city of Atlanta and its people were left reeling. The case of the Atlanta child murders had thrust them into the national spotlight and forever marked their city with a dark legacy. This was a community ripped apart, a community forced to grapple with an unimaginable horror. The impact on the families of the victims was profound. Mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers, left to mourn their lost children, their pain magnified by the media's relentless scrutiny. Many of them would never find closure, their hopes of justice dimmed by the lingering doubts over Williams' guilt. In the years that followed, some of these families would continue to fight for their loved ones, lobbying for the case to be reopened and re-examined. The media, too, would remain forever changed. The Atlanta child murders had dominated headlines for over 2 years, drawing the world's attention to the racial and social tensions simmering beneath the surface of Atlanta society. Journalists who had covered the case were forced to confront difficult questions about their own role in the narrative. The case raised concerns about the media's portrayal of victims, particularly those from marginalized communities, and prompted a re-evaluation of how such stories are reported. The Atlanta child murders case also had a lasting impact on law enforcement. The case pioneered the use of fiber analysis as a major piece of forensic evidence, a technique that would be used in countless other investigations in the years to come. But the case also exposed the limitations of such technology, underlining the need for caution and critical thinking in interpreting forensic evidence. As for Williams, he would spend the rest of his life in prison, maintaining his innocence to this day. His name has become synonymous with one of the most notorious serial murder cases in American history. Yet, despite his infamy, the true extent of his guilt remains a subject of debate. The question of whether Williams was the sole perpetrator, a scapegoat, or perhaps even an innocent man, continues to haunt those who remember the Atlanta child murders. In many ways, the legacy of the Atlanta child murders is one of unresolved questions and painful memories. It serves as a stark reminder of the capacity for human cruelty, but also of the resilience of a community in the face of unimaginable tragedy. It is a case that will continue to be studied, discussed, and debated, a chilling chapter in the annals of American crime. And yet, the end of the Atlanta child murders case was not a definitive conclusion, but an opening to a host of unanswered questions that continue to reverberate. The ambiguity surrounding Williams's guilt or innocence has given rise to alternative theories that persist to this day. Some posit that the murders were the work of a group or a network, a notion that seemed to gain traction after the FBI's behavioral science unit suggested that the crimes may have been committed by more than one person. However, no concrete evidence has ever been found to support this theory. Others believe that the murders were racially motivated, pointing to the Ku Klux Klan's active presence in Atlanta during the late 1970s and early 80s. This theory was further fueled by a leaked FBI document suggesting the Klan might have been involved. However, this too remains an unproven hypothesis, a chilling possibility that adds another haunting layer to the mystery of the Atlanta child murders. The question of Williams's guilt or innocence also raises troubling implications about the justice system. If he was indeed the killer, then the system ultimately prevailed. However, if Williams was innocent, then the true perpetrator or perpetrators of these heinous crimes walked free, while an innocent man spent his life behind bars. It's a disturbing dichotomy that underscores the importance of thorough and unbiased investigations. Moreover, the case has left a scar on Atlanta's collective consciousness. It's a wound that's been reopened time and again as new details emerge or as old doubts resurface. The city's African-American community in particular was deeply traumatized. The murders exposed stark racial and socioeconomic disparities and highlighted the vulnerability of Atlanta's marginalized populations. Ultimately, the Atlanta child murders case is a complex tapestry of fact and speculation, conviction and doubt. It serves as a stark reminder of the fallibility of memory, the malleability of evidence, and the power of public opinion. It's a case that challenges our faith in the justice system, our understanding of human nature, and our ability to make sense of the incomprehensible. In the end, the legacy of the Atlanta child murders is not simply about the man convicted for the crimes, but about the victims, their lives cut short, their families left to grieve, and their stories forever linked to a mystery that continues to confound. It's about a city marked by tragedy, a society grappling with its darkest fears, and a justice system tested to its limits. The haunting echoes of the Atlanta child murders continue to resonate, a chilling testament to the long shadow that such crimes cast. The questions, doubts, and implications that surround this case will likely persist, reminding us of the enduring impact of this grim chapter in American history. Thanks for listening. This has been another episode of Serial Killers Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like to support the show, Subscribe to Serial Killers Podcast on Spotify. Subscribe now.